regrets. So our last reading, I always tell Edwin this is my favorite reading because it really speaks to my heart. So, and it's a very short reading. And actually I asked Edwin, given what he does for a living, if he really wanted this introduction in the book. The name of his story is No Regrets. Edwin Batongbacal became a student activist while studying at De La Salle University, Manila in the late 1970s. Upon graduating in 1979, Edwin worked for about a year in the underground support branch of the Eastern Central Luzon Regional Organization of the New People's Army and the National Democratic Front. In 1980, Edwin immigrated to the United States with his parents, and he joined the KDP National Secretariat shortly after his arrival. He was assigned to a KDP housing collective and ultimately deployed to the International Association of Filipino Patriots. Edwin subsequently worked in KDP chapters in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and like other activists, Edwin eventually went back to school where he studied to become a social worker. He now works for San Francisco County and continues to be active in supporting pro-democracy efforts in the Philippines.
I'll make sure I'm being seen on the live stream. The marvels of Facebook. Okay. So just a little bit of context. Why no regrets? Why did I even write such a thing? So the article was written about 30 or so years ago, soon after the KDP closed. And you know, 30 years provides a lot of hindsight and a lot of benefits. But back then, 30 years ago, there was a certain somberness, a certain feelings of being lost when that accompanied the closing of the KDP. For me, it was the closing of 10 years of activism since my university days in the Philippines. So what caused us to be sad during those days? You know, in fact, we should be happy because the dictator was overthrown. And yet there was a certain, and we should be content and, you know, about our victory and happy. But the reasons for our dejection can be explained by the reasons and the context for why we became active. And Renee did a little bit of explanation on that. But for my part, and I think for a lot of people, you know, we became active in the Philippines, where society was so corrupt. I mean, you know, you had wide differences in power between the very rich, obscenely rich, and the very poor. There was impunity in public office, and if you were wanting to do anything to correct that, you couldn't just focus on one thing because the whole system was so wrapped up with corruption. And so very soon, you got attracted to people who had an all-encompassing explanation of the rottenness that was Philippine society. And that group was, of course, led by the Communist Party of the Philippines, and it had a vision for change. And you got swept up with that because, you know, the society was so sick, there was no other way but to approach its remedy in a comprehensive, revolutionary way. In particular, we were enraptured by, you know, the socialist model of social justice. And so we joined with an all-encompassing vision. For the people here, it was also, in the US, it was also a time of major change. There was the Vietnam War that was inexplicably unjust. There was civil rights movement. So people here also were looking for a larger explanation. And you know, the two streams came together. And so we weren't just fighting a single thing. We were fighting for a socialist future. The reason why we emerge from the KDP with a lot of sadness is because it takes two things to be inspired by a vision. One is the vision itself. You have to have a vision. That's a socialist vision. But the other part is the group of people who are willing to embrace and carry that out and are united around it. And even to the extent that they become what we called ourselves back then, the revolutionary vanguard, where all we wanted to do was to really be agents of change, and all of us were united around a common plan of change, so that the little thing that I did, distributing taliba in church, was connected to a big thing and it was going to get somewhere. That was the inspiration that we had. And so the problem with what happened with the KDP was we did overthrow the dictatorship, but the movement was gone. You know, we were having battles with the Communist Party of the Philippines, which we were realizing was so constricted in its vision. In particular, there were two things. It was dogmatic. It wasn't willing to learn and explore new paradigms of history as history was unfolding. And it was also very sectarian. And we just couldn't hang out with this group of people who were like that. So we lost the people. But we also lost the vision. You know, a friend of ours, Bruce, you know, inspired me one day when I was still critical of the Soviet Union. He said, Edwin, the problem is you support socialism everywhere except where it actually exists. So I said, oh, okay, we have to support socialism no matter its deficiencies. You know, it's the first toehold of a new, bright society that wanted to live in the world. And so, okay, we'll support it. But, you know, it collapsed. It collapsed with all of the rottenness that got uncovered afterwards. So we lost the people who were dogmatic and sectarian, and we lost the vision. That's why we were so sad. Okay? And that's the context for why I wrote this article.
Longer than his article.
So no regrets. Why was I ever drawn to the movement? Answering this question is important because I now look back at how my life diverged from those of my schoolmates and friends. By the way, I came from an Ivy League school, and so 30 years ago I was looking at my classmates across Southeast Asia and they were doing really well, and I was so sad that I became a communist instead. Since I was privileged with the best education money could buy in the Philippines, I seek some explanation, some reason that will satisfy and assure me that what I did during all my years in the movement was worthwhile, and that my life today is all the better for it. No regrets is where I want to be. I wrote to my friend in the Philippines, Maita Gomez, around 1990 that it's no use wringing our hands in despair and regretting that we spent much of a good part of our lives sacrificing for a movement that didn't go where it wanted to go. Maita was a famous former model and beauty queen who joined the revolutionary underground in the Philippines, and she passed away in 2012. She was one of my inspirations for why I joined the movement. But I don't think it was just because she was beautiful.
Sure?
Okay. In recent years, we both found ourselves at a crossroads, struggling to make sense of the death of our movement and lamenting the wasted lives and delayed dreams that would never blossom to their fullest. I wrote her that it's no use regretting what we have done, because if we really looked at it, took into account who we were and the times we were living in, we could not but have done what we did. However, this type of determinism only quiets my soul temporarily, because an inevitable tragedy is still a tragedy. To be truly at peace, I must instead reconnect with the fire that burned in my heart a lifetime ago. To have no regrets, I must regain that firm belief in the cause that I embraced so wholeheartedly, even as I continue to live the new life I have today, and even as I remain aware of the paradigms that history seems to have disproved. I guess I miss believing. The collapse of existing socialism and the derailment of the Philippine revolutionary movement have taken its toll on my capacity to believe. My hope is to find peace in discovering what remains true of my old leftist convictions, determining which truths I can believe in as firmly today as I did back then. I sense that what remains true is to be found not merely in polemics about debatable truths, in political philosophy, economy, and strategy, but also in the subjective and personal realms of what truly constitutes a life worth living.
You'll be thoroughly criticized afterwards for giving a big speech. Really. Thank you, Edwin. So, I also want to thank Edwin in particular because he pulled together the team that organized this event tonight. And Edwin has found a movement to continue believing in. Edwin and myself and Jolene are part of the Akbayan Party, the International Committee. We've been to two elections to observe, to look at the irregularities, the violence in the elections, and we'll be going again to the Akbayan Congress in April. But don't tell my boss, okay?